Chapter 10. At watering places, and I believe in Europe generally, hotel keepers and Oberkellners, in assigning rooms to their visitors, are guided not so much by the demands and desires of the latter as by their own personal opinion of them. And one must add they are rarely mistaken. But for some reason I cannot explain, they had assigned Granny such a splendid suite that they had quite overshot the mark. It consisted of 4 splendidly furnished rooms with a bathroom, quarters for the servants, and a special room for the maid, and so on. Some Grande Duchesse really had been staying in those rooms the week before, a fact of which the new occupant was informed at once in order to enhance the value of the apartments. Granny was carried, or rather wheeled, through all the rooms, and she looked at them attentively and severely. The Oberkellner, an elderly man with a bald head, followed her respectfully at this first survey. I don't know what they all took Granny to be, but apparently for a very important, and above all, wealthy lady. They put down in the book at once, Madame la Générale Princesse de Tarasevitchev, though Granny had never been a princess. Her servants, her special compartment in the train, the mass of useless bags, portmanteaux, and even chests that had come with Granny, probably laid the foundation of her prestige, while her invalid chair, her abrupt tone and voice, her eccentric questions, which were made with a most unconstrained air that would tolerate no contradiction. In short, Granny's whole figure, erect, brisk, imperious, increased the awe in which she was held by all. As she looked at the rooms, Granny sometimes told them to stop her chair, pointed to some object in the furniture, and addressed unexpected questions to the Oberkellner, who still smiled respectfully, though he was beginning to feel nervous. Granny put her questions in French, which she spoke, however, rather badly, so that I usually translated. The Oberkellner's answers for the most part did not please her and seemed unsatisfactory. And indeed she kept asking about all sorts of things quite irrelevant. Suddenly, for instance, stopping before a picture, a rather feeble copy of some well-known picture of a mythological subject, she would ask, "Whose portrait is that?" The Oberkellner replied that no doubt it was some countess. "How is it you don't know? You live here and don't know. Why is it here? Why is she squinting?" The Oberkellner could not answer these questions satisfactorily, and positively lost his head. "Oh, what a blockhead," commented Granny in Russian. She was wheeled on. The same performance was repeated with a Dresden statuette, which Granny looked at for a long time, and then ordered them to remove, no one knew why. Finally she worried the Oberkellner about what the carpets in the bedroom cost, and where they had been woven. The Oberkellner promised to make inquiries. "What asses!" Granny grumbled, and concentrated her whole attention on the bed. "What a gorgeous canopy! Open the bed!" They opened the bed. More, turn it all over! Take off the pillows, lift up the feather bed!" Everything was turned over. Granny examined it attentively. "It's a good thing there are no bugs. Take away all the linen, make it up with my linen and my pillows. But all this is too gorgeous. Such rooms are not for an old woman like me. I shall be dreary all alone. Alexey Ivanovitch, you must come and see me very often when your lessons with the children are over." "I left the general service yesterday," I answered, "and am living in the hotel quite independently." "How is that?" "A German of high rank, a baron with his baroness, came here from Berlin the other day. I addressed him yesterday in German without keeping to the Berlin accent."
"Well, what then?"
"He thought it an impertinence and complained to the general, and yesterday the general discharged me."
"Why, did you swear at the Baron or what? Though if you had, it wouldn't have mattered."
"Oh, no. On the contrary, the Baron raised his stick to thrash me."
"And did you, sniveller, allow your tutor to be treated like that?"
she said suddenly, addressing the general.
"And turned him out of his place, too? Noodles! You're all a set of noodles, as I see."
"Don't disturb yourself, Auntie," said the general with a shade of condescending familiarity. "I can manage my own business. Besides, Alexey Ivanovitch has not given you quite a correct account of it."
"And you just put up with it?"
She turned to me. "I meant to challenge the Baron to a duel," I answered as calmly and modestly as I could. "But the general opposed it."
"Why did you oppose it?"
Granny turned to the general again.
"And you can go, my good man, you can come when you are called,"
she said, addressing the Oberkellner.
"No need to stand about gaping. I can't endure this Nuremberg rabble."
The man bowed and went out, not, of course, understanding Granny's compliments.
"Upon my word, Auntie, surely a duel was out of the question."
"Why out of the question? Men are all cocks, so they should fight. You are all noodles, I see. You don't know how to stand up for your country. Come, take me up, Potapych. See that there are always 2 porters. Engage them. I don't want more than 2. I shall only want them to carry me up and down stairs and to wheel me on the levels in the street. Explain that to them, and pay them beforehand. They will be more respectful. You will always be with me yourself, and you, Alexey Ivanovitch, point out that Baron to me when we are out, that I may have a look at the von Baron. Well, where is the roulette?"
I explained that the roulette tables were in rooms in the casino. Then followed questions. Were there many of them? Did many people play? Did they play all day long? How was it arranged? I answered at last that she had much better see all this with her own eyes, and that it was rather difficult to describe it.
"Well then, take me straight there. You go first, Alexey Ivanovitch."
"Why, Auntie, don't you really mean to rest after your journey?"
the general asked anxiously. He seemed rather flurried, and indeed they all seemed embarrassed and were exchanging glances. Probably they all felt it rather risky and indeed humiliating to accompany Granny to the casino, where, of course, she might do something eccentric and in public. At the same time, they all proposed to accompany her.
"Why should I rest? I am not tired, and besides, I've been sitting still for 3 days. And then we will go and see the springs and medicinal waters. Where are they? And then we'll go and see, what was it you said, Praskovia? Peak, wasn't it?"
"Yes, Granny."
"Well, peak then, if it is a peak. And what else is there here?"
"There are a great many objects of interest, Granny," Polina exerted herself to say.
"Why don't you know them? Marfa, you shall come with me too," she said, addressing her maid.
"But why should she come?" the general said fussily. "And in fact it's out of the question, and I doubt whether Potapych will be admitted into the casino."
"What nonsense! Am I to abandon her because she is a servant? She's a human being too. Here we have been on our travels for a week. She wants to have a look at things too. With whom could she go except me? She wouldn't dare show her nose in the street by herself."
"But, Granny—"
Why, are you ashamed to be with me? Then stay at home, you are not asked. Why, what a general! I am a general's widow myself. And why should you all come trailing after me? I can look at it all with Alexey Ivanovitch.
But Degrue insisted that we should all accompany her, and launched out into the most polite phrases about the pleasure of accompanying her, and so on. We all started. Elle est tombée en enfance, Degrue repeated to the general. Seule elle fera des bêtises. I heard nothing more, but he evidently had some design, and possibly his hopes had revived. It was 1/2 a mile to the casino. The way was through an avenue of chestnuts to a square, going round which they came out straight on the casino. The general was to some extent reassured, for our procession, though somewhat eccentric, was nevertheless decorous and presentable. And there was nothing surprising in the fact of an invalid who could not walk putting in an appearance at the casino. But anyway, the general was afraid of the casino. Why should an invalid unable to walk, and an old lady too, go into the gambling saloon? Paulina and Mademoiselle Blanche walked on each side of the bath-chair. Mademoiselle Blanche laughed, was modestly animated, and even sometimes jested very politely with Granny, so much so that the latter spoke of her approvingly at last. Paulina, on the other side, was obliged to be continually answering Granny's innumerable questions, such as, "Who was that past? Who was that woman driving past? Is it a big town? Is it a big garden? What are those trees? What's that hill? Do eagles fly here? What is that absurd-looking roof?" Mr. Astley walked beside me and whispered that he expected a great deal from that morning. Potapych and Marfa walked in the background, close behind the bath-chair. Potapych in his swallow-tailed coat and white tie, but with a cap on his head, and Marfa, a red-faced maid-servant, 40 years old and beginning to turn grey, in a cap, cotton gown, and creaking goatskin slippers. Granny turned to them very often and addressed remarks to them. Degrue was talking with an air of determination. Probably he was reassuring the general. Evidently he was giving him some advice. But Granny had already pronounced the fatal phrase, "I am not going to give you money." Perhaps to Degrue this announcement sounded incredible, but the general knew his aunt. I noticed that Degrue and Mademoiselle Blanche were continually exchanging glances. I could distinguish the prince and the German traveller at the farther end of the avenue. They had stopped and were walking away from us. Our visit to the casino was a triumph. The porters and attendants displayed the same deference as in the hotel. They looked at us, however, with curiosity. Granny began by giving orders that she should be wheeled through all the rooms. Some she admired, others made no impression on her. She asked questions about them all. At last we came to the roulette room. The lackeys, who stood like sentinels at closed doors, flung the doors wide open as though they were impressed. Granny's appearance at the roulette table made a profound impression on the public. At the roulette tables and at the other end of the room, where there was a table with 30-40, there was a crowd of 150 or 200 players, several rows deep. Those who had succeeded in squeezing their way right up to the table held fast, as they always do, and would not give up their places to anyone until they had lost. For simple spectators were not allowed to stand at the tables and occupy the space. Though there were chairs set round the table, few of the players sat down, especially when there was a great crowd, because standing one could get closer and consequently pick out one's place and put down one's stake more conveniently. The second and the third rows pressed up upon the first, waiting and watching for their turn. But sometimes a hand would be impatiently thrust forward through the first row to put down a stake. Even from the third row, people managed to seize chances of poking forward their stakes. Consequently, every 10 or even 5 minutes there was some scene over disputed stakes at one end of the hall or another. The police of the casino were, however, fairly good. It was, of course, impossible to prevent crowding. On the contrary, the owners were glad of the rush of people because it was profitable. But 8 croupiers sitting around the table kept a vigilant watch on the stakes. They even kept count of them, and when disputes arose they could settle them. In extreme cases they called in the police, and the trouble was over in an instant. There were police officers in plain clothes stationed here and there among the players, so that they could not be recognized. They were especially on the lookout for thieves and professional pickpockets, who are very numerous at the roulette tables, as it affords them excellent opportunity for exercising their skill. The fact is, elsewhere thieves must pick pockets or break locks, and such enterprises, when unsuccessful, have a very troublesome ending. But in this case the thief has only to go up to the roulette table, begin playing, and all at once, openly and publicly, take another person's winnings and put them in his pocket. If a dispute arises, the cheat insists loudly that the stake was his. If the trick is played cleverly and the witnesses hesitate, the thief may often succeed in carrying off the money, if the sum is not a very large one, of course. In that case, the croupiers or some one of the other players are almost certain to have been keeping an eye on it. But if the sum is not a large one, the real owner sometimes actually declines to keep up the dispute, and goes away shrinking from the scandal. But if they succeed in detecting a thief, they turn him out at once with contumely. All this Granny watched from a distance with wild curiosity. She was much delighted at a thief's being turned out. 30-40 did not interest her very much. She was more pleased at roulette and the rolling of the little ball. She evinced a desire at last to get a closer view of the game. I don't know how it happened, but the attendants and other officious persons, principally Poles who had lost and who pressed their services on lucky players and foreigners of all sorts, at once, and in spite of the crowd, cleared a place for Granny in the very middle of the table beside the chief croupier, and wheeled her chair to it. A number of visitors who were not playing, but watching the play, chiefly Englishmen with their families, at once crowded round the table to watch Granny from behind the players. Numbers of lorgnettes were turned in her direction. The croupier's expectations rose. Such an eccentric person certainly seemed to promise something out of the ordinary. An old woman of 70 who could not walk, yet wished to play, was, of course, not a sight to be seen every day. I squeezed my way up to the table, too, and took my stand beside Granny. Potapich and Marfa were left somewhere in the distance among the crowd. The General, Polina, de Grue, and Mademoiselle Blanche stood aside, too, among the spectators. At first, Granny began looking about at the players. She began in a half-whisper asking me abrupt, jerky questions. Who is that man, and who is this woman? She was particularly delighted by a young man at the end of the table who was playing for very high stakes, putting down thousands, and had, as people whispered around, already won as much as 40,000 francs, which lay before him in heaps of gold and banknotes. He was pale. His eyes glittered and his hands were shaking. He was staking now without counting, by handfuls, and yet he kept on winning and winning, kept raking in the money. The attendants hung about him solicitously, set a chair for him, cleared a place round him that he might have more room, that he might not be crowded. All this in expectation of a liberal tip. Some players, after they have won, tip the attendants without counting a handful of coins in their joy. A Pole had already established himself at his side and was deferentially but continually whispering to him, probably telling him what to stake on, advising and directing his play. Of course he, too, expecting a tip later on. But the players scarcely looked at him. He staked at random and kept winning. He evidently did not know what he was doing. Granny watched him for some minutes.
"Tell him,"
Granny said suddenly, growing excited and giving me a poke.
"Tell him to give it up, to take his money quickly and go away. He'll lose it all directly, he'll lose it all,"
she urged, almost breathless with agitation.
"Where's Potapich? Send Potapich to him. Come, tell him, she went on, poking me. "Where is Potapich? Sorte, sorte!"
she began herself shouting to the young man. I bent down to her and whispered resolutely that she must not shout like this here, that even talking aloud was forbidden, because it hindered counting, and that we should be turned out directly.
"How vexatious! The man's lost. I suppose it's his own doing. I can't look at him, it quite upsets me. What a dolt!"
And Granny made haste to turn in another direction. On the left, on the other side of the table, there was conspicuous among the players a young lady, and beside her a sort of dwarf. Who this dwarf was, and whether he was a relation or brought by her for the sake of effect, I don't know. I had noticed the lady before. She made her appearance at the gambling table every day at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and went away exactly at 2. She always played for an hour. She was already known, and a chair was set for her at once. She took out of her pocket some gold, some 1,000-franc notes, and began staking quietly, coolly, prudently, making pencil notes on a bit of paper of the numbers about which the chances grouped themselves, and trying to work out a system. She staked considerable sums. She used to win every day, 1, 2, or at the most 3,000 francs, not more, and instantly went away. Granny scrutinized her for a long time.
"Well, that one won't lose. That one there won't lose. Of what class is she? Do you know? Who is she?"
"She must be a Frenchwoman of a certain class, you know," I whispered.
"Ah, one can tell the bird by its flight. One can see she has a sharp claw. Explain to me now what every turn means and how one has to bet."
I explained as far as I could to Granny all the various points on which one could stake. Rouge et noir, pair et impair, manque et passe, and finally the various subtleties in the system of the numbers. Granny listened attentively, remembered, asked questions, and began to master it. One could point to examples of every kind, so that she very quickly and readily picked up a great deal.
"But what about 0? You see that croupier, the curly-headed one, the chief one, showed 0 just now. And why did he scoop up everything that was on the table? Such a heap! He took it all for himself. What is the meaning of it?"
0, Granny, means that the bank wins all. If the little ball falls on 0, everything on the table goes to the bank. It is true you can stake your money so as to keep it, but the bank pays nothing."
"You don't say so. And shall I get nothing?"
"No, Granny. If before this you had staked on 0, you would have got 35 times what you staked."
"What, 35 times? And does it often turn up? Why don't they stake on it, the fools?
There are 36 chances against it, Granny.
What nonsense! Potapich! Stay, I've money with me. Here.
She took out of her pocket a tightly packed purse and picked out of it a Friedrich door.
Stake it on the 0 at once.
Granny, 0 has only just turned up, I said. So now it won't turn up for a long time. You will lose a great deal. Wait a little anyway.
Oh, nonsense! Put it down!
As you please, but it may not turn up again till the evening. You may go on staking thousands. It has happened.
Oh, nonsense! If you are afraid of the wolf, you shouldn't go into the forest. What, have I lost? Stake again!
A second Friedrich door was lost. She staked a third. Granny could scarcely sit still in her seat. She stared with feverish eyes at the little ball dancing on the spokes of the turning wheel. She lost a third, too. Granny was beside herself. She could not sit still. She even thumped on the table with her fist when the croupier announced 36 instead of the 0 she was expecting.
There, look at it, said Granny angrily. Isn't that cursed little 0 coming soon? As sure as I'm alive, I'll sit here till 0 does come. It's that cursed curly-headed croupier's doing. He'll never let it come. Alexey Ivanovitch, stake 2 gold pieces at once. Staking as much as you do, even if 0 does come, you'll get nothing by it.
Granny!
Stake! It's not your money.
I staked 2 Friedrich's door. The ball flew about the wheel for a long time. At last it began dancing about the spokes. Granny was numb with excitement and squeezed my fingers, and all at once, 0! boomed the croupier.
You see!
Granny turned to me quickly, beaming and delighted.
I told you so. The Lord himself put it into my head to stake those 2 gold pieces. Well, how much do I get now? Why don't they give it to me? Potapich, Marfa, where are they? Where have all our people got to? Potapich!
Granny, afterwards, I whispered. Potapich is at the door. They won't let him in. Look, Granny, they are giving you the money. Take it. A heavy roll of printed blue notes, worth 50 Friedrich's door, was thrust toward Granny, and 20 Friedrich's door were counted out to her. I scooped it all up in a shovel and handed it to Granny. Faites le jeu, monsieur! Faites le jeu, monsieur! Rien ne va plus! Called the croupier, inviting the public to stake and preparing to turn the wheel.
Heavens, we are too late! They're just going to turn it. Put it down!
Granny urged me in a flurry.
Don't dawdle, make haste!
She was beside herself and poked me with all her might. What am I to stake it on, Granny?
On 0 again! Stake as much as possible. How much have we got altogether? 70 Friedrich's door. There's no need to spare it. Stake 20 Friedrich's door at once.
Think what you are doing, Granny. Sometimes it does not turn up for 200 times running. I assure you, you may go on staking your whole fortune.
Oh, nonsense! Put it down! How your tongue does wag! I know what I'm about.
Granny was positively quivering with excitement. By the regulations, it's not allowed to stake more than 12 rubles on 0 at once, Granny. Here, I have staked that.
Why is it not allowed? Aren't you lying? Monsieur!
She nudged the croupier, who was sitting near her on the left and was about to set the wheel turning.
Combien 0? 12?
I immediately interpreted the question in French. Oui, madame, the croupier confirmed politely. As the winnings from no single stake must exceed 4,000 florins by the regulations, he added in explanation.
Well, there's no help for it. Stake 12.
Le jeu est fait, cried the croupier. The wheel rotated and 30 turned up. She had lost.
Again! Stake again! cried Granny.
I no longer resisted, and, shrugging my shoulders, staked another 12 Friedrichsdor. The wheel turned a long time. Granny was simply quivering as she watched the wheel. Can she really imagine that Zero will win again? I thought, looking at her with wonder. Her face was beaming with a firm conviction of winning, an unhesitating expectation that in another minute they would shout 0. The ball jumped into the cage. 0! cried the croupier.
What?
Granny turned to me with intense triumph. I was a gambler myself. I felt that at the moment my arms and legs were trembling. There was a throbbing in my head. Of course, this was a rare chance that 0 should have come up 3 times in some dozen turns, but there was nothing particularly wonderful about it. I had myself seen 0 turn up 3 times running 2 days before, and a gambler who had been zealously noting down the numbers observed aloud that, only the day before, 0 had turned up only once in 24 hours. Granny's winnings were counted out to her with particular attention and deference as she had won such a large sum. She received 420 Friedrichsdor, that is 4,000 florins and 70 Friedrichsdor. She was given 20 Friedrichsdor in gold and 4,000 florins in banknotes. This time Granny did not call Potapich. She had other preoccupations. She did not even babble or quiver outwardly. She was, if one may so express it, quivering inwardly. She was entirely concentrated on something, absorbed in one aim.
Alexey Ivanovitch, he said that one could only stake 4,000 florins at once, didn't he? Come, take it. Stake the whole 4,000 on red, Granny commanded.
It was useless to protest. The wheel began rotating. Rouge! The croupier proclaimed. Again she had won 4,000 florins, making 8 in all.
Give me 4 and stake 4 again on red, Granny commanded.
Again I staked 4,000. Rouge! The croupier pronounced again.
12,000 altogether. Give it me all here. Pour the gold here into the purse and put away the notes. That's enough. Home! Wheel my chair out.
Breaking in. 2 small details from this chapter probably deserve mention. One is de Gru's reaction to Granny's appearance. Despite her obvious health and her stated intention not to give the general her money, the Frenchman still appears to hold out hope of getting his hands on it. The new plot seems to be to get the general to take control of Granny's estate on the grounds that the old woman is now senile, or has fallen into childhood, as he puts it. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth, as Granny is an astonishingly sharp woman for her age. Whether she is wise is another matter. The other detail is our narrator's statement that he, too, was a gambler. Now, this pronouncement seems at first to be rather at odds with his claim in Chapter 2 that playing with Polina's money marked the first time in his life that he had ever entered a gambling saloon. Alexey Ivanovitch at this point in the narrative has had very little history with the activity. When he claims to be a gambler himself, he appears not to be making a statement about his experience, but about his character. More on this to come. End of comments.